In this episode, we're setting up quiet crouching, so both ourselves and our AI character can identify obstacles that can be crouched under and navigate appropriately. Hey guys, welcome to today's episode, and today it's all revolving around crouching. We're going to cover a lot, not everything, but a lot of what you would need to make a thief-like sneaking game. So for example, we're not specifically covering things like how to hug geometry or how to go prone like all along the ground, but I think by the end of this episode that you're going to have a sense of how to do that, because everything that we're doing, it's really going to revolve around how to change our character's capsule component and also change how our character and the AI character, if the AI character is doing this, generates sounds like footsteps and is able to be detected. So here are the key concepts for this episode. Everything revolves around crouching, obviously, but what's essential about crouching is how it affects our player's movement via the capsule component. And then of course we've got the animation piece where our crouching animation is blending with either idle or walking or running. So let's get to it. In episode 25, we went over how to retarget Mixamo animations to the Unreal Engine 5 Mannequin. But since then, the Mixamo Converter has actually had an update, and the process is even easier now. The first step is to find the mannequin you want to use in the Mixamo Converter folder and upload that mannequin into Mixamo. It'll take a moment to process, and then you're ready to get the animations that you need. You can find a link in the description below to the spreadsheet that we're using for every animation in this series, and also a link to the free Mixamo Converter. If you're getting a movement animation, make sure In Place is checked. And then when you download, make sure that it's without skin and keyframe reduction is set to uniform. Once you've downloaded the animations, move them from your Downloads folder into the Mixamo Converter incoming FBX folder. Then open up the Mixamo Converter, enter the conversion process, scroll down, and click here to convert the animations. Once you do that, open the outgoing FBX folder, and the animations are ready to be imported into Unreal Engine. And when you open up Unreal Engine, just drag and drop the animations to the UE folder of your choosing. You'll get the FBX import options pop up. Make sure to select the appropriate skeleton. In our case, since we use the UE5 Mannequin skeleton from Mixamo Converter, we can select the SK Mannequin directly. The other thing I found is I needed to lower the Z value slightly by -2 or -3 in order to get the right positioning on import. Here are all the import settings that I used. And then following the import, we're all set to use these animations. So we're going to start today by setting up crouching both on our third-person character and our AI adversary character. So if you're just doing this on your third-person character, you can open that right up. And if you want to do it on both, then by all means, open up your AI character. So I'm just going to come back to my content drawer, AI, and our BP adversary AI character. And although my adversary AI character is actually a child class of the third-person character class, I ran into trouble when I tried adjusting the movement component for crouching directly on the third-person character. So I'm just going to do it first on our AI character, and then I'll also do it on the third person. But let me back up a minute, because when I was initially thinking about crouching, I was trying to think of, okay, we got to come up with all these different variables, we got to adjust our capsule component, we have to do all these things. But then I realized, oh wait, crouching is actually a standard part of the movement component that's available on every character in the game. So if we navigate over to our movement component, character movement here, and then if you go over to the details panel and search for crouch, so we get a few different settings. We got our crouched half height, which is the half height of the capsule when we're in a crouched position. And what this is going to determine is how much the capsule is shrunk when our character is crouched, such that they can get into smaller positions than they could when they're standing up. And that I'm going to leave exactly the same for now. But our max walk speed crouched, I'm going to decrease this to about 150. And that's to match the animation that we just downloaded. And then we have this checkbox, can walk off ledges when crouching, and I'm going to say yes, because the crouch functionality that we set up this episode, it's going to work just fine with all of our IK foot setup that we've set up in previous episodes. And then last but not least, of course, we can crouch. So once you've got all that, make sure to compile and save your AI character, or if you're doing this directly on your third-person character. But now I'm going to go over to my third-person character, and we're going to set up the same thing. So character movement, change this to 150, can walk off ledges, and can crouch. Compile and save. So now I'm going to do the setup on a third-person character, and where I'm going to start is on our event graph. I'm just going to move up right next to our walk-run toggle that we set up all the way back in episode 4 of this series, because I think of crouching as very similar to that walk-run toggle. And so for me, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set keyboard C to be what triggers crouching, but you could set this up for any keyboard button that you like. So we search for keyboard, I'm going to scroll down to C, select that. And the way it's going to work is if I'm holding C, my character is going to be crouched, and if I release C, my character is going to uncrouch. And luckily, because we're using the standard setup on our character movement component for crouching, we have a standard function that already exists for this. So from press, I can just search for crouch, And then we also see an uncrouch function. And so when released, that's when we're going to uncrouch. And proactively, I'm just going to go ahead and comment this. So C, and it's going to be our quiet crouching. So let's compile and save, and we're ready to test this out, although a lot of things are not going to work yet, but let's just give it a try. All right, so here we go, moment of truth. I'm running, and then crouch. And we saw our camera just shift downward, but our character is not actually crouched. And that's because we haven't hooked up any animation yet. So let's do that next. So for this, we've got to open up our animation blueprint. So I'm going to navigate back to my core folder, ABP third person character. We need to start by going into our animation graph. And specifically, we're going to do this in a locomotion state machine. And I thought about creating a separate state for this. So I thought about having something that would transition from idle or walk run to crouching. But in testing this out, I just found that it worked great to have a simple blend poses by bool node in each of these. So we're going to hook up our idle crouching animation in idle, and we're going to hook up our crouch forward animation in the walk run. So let's start with idle. And if you don't have all this stuff in your idle animation, that's totally fine. This is just stuff that we've set up in previous episodes. But the important thing that you need is wherever you have your animation. So you probably just have an idle here. And don't even worry about this layered blend per bone here. This is coming from episode 42 where we did health and damage effects. But basically after your idle animation here, you need to go directly into a blend poses by bool. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to move this over a little bit. And from here, we are going to blend poses by bool. This. And I'm going to set the time to blend in and out of these poses to about 0.2 seconds. So it's going to take about 0.2 seconds to actually go into that crouch position. And this way the character is not moving their entire body in like a split second. And actually this right here, or if you're hooking up your idle animation directly, that's going to be hooked up to the false. Because if crouching is true, then it's going to use our crouching animation. So we're going to pull that in right here. So to do that, let's go to the content drawer, over to content. I saved my animations under characters, mannequins, animation, Manny, Mixamo. And we're first going to use the crouch idle animation. So I'll pull that in here. And the only thing we need to update here is we need to loop animation, and then I can connect that up to the true. But now we have to tell our blend poses by bool here when to actually use this crouch idle animation. And so what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to get a reference to our third person character. And this we've set up in previous episodes. And then from that, I can get whether or not our character is crouching. Get is crouched. And that's a standard Boolean because we have our standard movement component. And I can just hook that up directly to the active. And so if our character is crouched, it's going to do this. And if our character is not crouched, it's going to do the standard. Well, here we got two different idle animations depending on whether our character is injured. So if you've got all that for idle, you're all set, compile and save. So now we got to set it up when our character is actually moving. So for that, I'm going to go back to locomotion into walk run. And we're going to do the same exact kind of thing. So again, just ignore all this stuff, totally fine. But I'm going to do it right after we blend all of our other poses here. So we right click, we do a blend poses by bool. And basically the reason I'm making this the last thing is because crouching is not going to be affected by our player's damage. So if our character takes a lot of damage, they're still going to crouch. They're still going to have the same animation crouching that they normally would. Because whatever path is true last in this chain of events, that's the path that's actually going to be taken. So I'll connect this up here to the false. And then to our true, once again, we can go into that same folder, get our crouch walk forward, and drag that in, connect this up, and make sure to set this to loop. I'm going to move this over just a little bit, connect this up here, move this down. Our time, once again, is going to be 0.2 seconds for each, and we're going to do the same exact thing for the active value here. We'll drag in a reference to our third person character, drag in a reference to whether or not he's crouched, get is crouched, connect this up, compile and save, and we are ready to test this out again. All right, I'm walking C. And now I'm into a crouch position. And you'll notice my camera is actually lower to the ground. And that's being controlled by the capsule half height that's being controlled by our movement component. And then I press C again and I'm back to normal. But as I was testing this out, to be honest, I found that sudden shift in the camera. I found it kind of annoying. So what if we got rid of that shift in the camera, but we still kept our capsule the appropriate size based on the crouched position of our character's animation? So that's what we're going to set up. So the first thing is we can close out of our ABP third person character. Won't need that anymore. And then over on our third person character blueprint, I'm going to create a brand new function. So under function +, this is going to be called lower crouch half height. And we're going to call this function every time we crouch. So what I'm going to do is I'm first going to get a reference to our capsule component. And then from the capsule component, I'm going to get the scaled capsule half height, this one right here. And if this is less than 71, and the reason I'm going to set this to 71 is in the crouching animation that we picked in this episode, it's at about a height of about 70 centimeters. But if you have a crouching animation that brings the character a lot lower, then you can lower this threshold. But we want our capsule to be roughly in line with how much our character is actually crouched. But then from the 71, I'm going to branch, connect this up here, And then I'm going to move over to the right. And what we're going to do is from our scaled capsule half height, I'm just going to decrement it. I'm going to subtract 1. So -1. Because what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to lower the half height over a small period of time and then raise it back again. Because we're going to call this function recursively. Because when the character crouches, the half height's going to come down, and it's going to come down over some small period of time and then back up to normal when the character uncrouches. So I can get another reference to our capsule component here. And from here, we are going to set the capsule half height. And we're only going to set this again if this is false. And I can connect this up here. But I'm also going to set the crouched half height. And that's going to prevent the camera kind of snapping when I crouch. So what I'm going to do, drag out from here, we'll do a reroute, and we'll get a reference to our character movement component. And then from that, we can set the crouched half height. Set crouched half height. Connect this up and connect this up right here. And then only if this is false. So if it's not less than 71, then we're going to call this function again until it drops below 71, until it drops to a value of 70. So to call this function again, I'm just going to do a set timer for next tick by function name. And I can right click on this, rename to get our function name, paste it right in here. So every single tick, it'll decrement by 1 until it hits that 70 threshold. And then what I can do is I can just duplicate this function for raise crouch half height. So right click, we're going to duplicate raise crouch half height. And this, instead of being less than 71, I'll delete out that, and I'll get whether or not it's greater than 89, because the normal half height, well, it's about 90. So connect this up. And then this, instead of -1, it's going to be a +1. So plus and 1, connect this up here, connect this up to the reroute, delete this one out, move it into position. And then I'll come over here to the right, and this is going to be raise crouch half height. So we'll compile and save this, and then back in our event graph, we just need to update this slightly. So the first thing I'm going to do is whenever I crouch, I'm going to clear timer by function name, because we could be currently uncrouching. We could be in the midst of that timer because it takes a few ticks to actually uncrouch and crouch. And so I want one to reset the other, basically. So I can get our raise crouch half height function, paste that in here. And then after I start crouching, this is going to lower crouch half height. That's going to kick off the function. And then I can duplicate this, and we're going to do the same thing for this one for uncrouch, except this is going to be lower crouch half height. So connect it up just like this. And then this is going to be raise, because whenever we uncrouch, that's where the half height of our capsule is going to go back to normal. But again, it's going to take about 20 ticks to do that, because you got to think of the difference between 90 and 70, and it's going to do that 1 per tick because of this. And so to test this, I'm going to do 2 things. So the first thing is when I select our capsule component, I'm going to search for hidden in game. And we are not going to make it hidden in game, just so I could see the capsule, how it adjusts over time. So let's compile and save this. And the next thing we need to do is we basically need to create a limbo bar. I assume limbo is a ubiquitous worldwide thing, but I don't know if that's the case. So let me know in the comments below. Okay, so in the United States, we have this game called Limbo. I think it's everywhere. So the way Limbo works is you set a certain threshold, whatever that threshold is, and people keep trying to go under the bar, but they have to go backwards under the bar. So to do that, we're going to do a shape, we're going to do a cube, and we're just going to make that cube roughly 10 times as long, something like that. I guess it should be a cylinder rather than a bar, but close enough. Okay, so let's go ahead and try this out. All right, so we see our capsule here. The beam is a little bit too high. I can just slam into it, but let's see if I crouch. So then a capsule shrinks over some period of time, and I still can't get under the beam, but that's appropriate because look, my head's actually through it a little bit. So let me make the beam a little bit higher. All right, so here we go. Yeah, it doesn't really work with the animation I've got, because again, I've got to do it like this. But yeah, you get the point. So you see the capsule changing slightly over time. But here's the problem. So if I'm crouched underneath the thing and then I just stop holding C, well, his head's straight through the roof. So the way we're going to address this is, so long as the character is crouched, we're going to do continuous traces upwards to see if the character can actually uncrouch. And the way I'm going to start is I'm going to select all the things under the release pin here, all these 3. And instead of just straight up uncrouching, we're going to collapse this to a function. And I'm going to call this function attempt to uncrouch. So right click, rename, attempt to uncrouch. And let's go into that function. So we got to make a lot of space here because we have to do that trace upwards. And I'm actually going to have the trace be roughly the same shape as our capsule so that we can make sure the capsule can actually expand to whatever height it needs to be, the full height. So we're going to start by getting a reference to our capsule component. And then from that, I'm going to get the world location. And we're going to start this trace a little bit above the waist. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add Z5, and it's only going to need to go up about 20 units because it's already going to take into consideration the capsule's height. So this is going to be 25. And then from this, we are going to do a capsule trace by channel. So I'm going to raise this up a little bit. This is going to be connected up to the start. This is connected up to the end. From the capsule component here, we can actually get the capsule radius, get capsule radius. That's going to be hooked up here. I'm going to make a little bit more space here because also from our capsule component, we're going to get the scaled capsule half height, top one here. And this is going to be hooked up to our half height. Now I had some issues using a trace channel of visibility here, so instead I'm going to use a trace channel of camera, and I found that to work just fine. And just for testing purposes, as always, we're going to do the draw debug for duration. So then the question is, what's going to happen if we get a hit? So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to make some space here. We're going to take our return value, we're going to branch off of that, connect that up here, connect up the false to here, because if we don't get a hit, then we can uncrouch. So I'll move this down into position, these two over. But if we do get a hit, what are we going to do? Well, then I'm going to do set timer by function name. And I'm going to do this every 0.3 seconds. And the reason I'm doing 0.3 is that's been our standard for movement adjustments based on what we started in our AI jump episode 49, I think. And the function name is going to be exactly what we got here. So it's just going to be attempt to uncrouch. Make sure you get that verbatim. So 0.3 seconds later, it's going to check to see, okay, is there something directly above us? And if not, then uncrouch. And then the last thing before we test this, let's go back to our event graph. I'm also going to collapse this top string. So we're going to right click, we are going to collapse to function. And this one is going to be titled right click comprehensive crouch. So let's compile and save, and we are ready to test this once again. All right, so here we go. See, looking good. And let me go under. And nope, can't uncrouch. And as I'm not holding C, we see those capsule traces as our character attempts to uncrouch, but attempts to do so unsuccessfully. And then if I come out, yep, then we're back to normal. So the next thing I'm going to test is how this interacts with all of our gameplay abilities. So let's pick those up. And if you're not following along with the gameplay ability episodes, then totally fine. You could skip over this portion of the episode. So I press C, and then let's do 1 for our speed boost. Okay, he's still crouched. His speed is unaffected. And then if I stop holding C, yep, and he's got his speed boost. And then C again, yep. So far, so good. Let's do number 3 now. Crouched. Yeah, he could be crouched and holding a torch. Totally fine. And I can unactivate the torch, reactivate. How about fireball? Looking good. How about flamethrower? So the flamethrower is the only ability that I think he shouldn't be able to use when crouched. And here's a good example why. So let's say he's under here and then he uses flamethrower. Yeah, so his head temporarily goes through the roof. And so this is entirely up to you, but I'm going to set it so that any channeled ability cannot be used when the character is in a crouched position. Now, as soon as the character gets out of crouch, totally fine, they can use it. But anything that's not channeled that we've set up in previous episodes, like the fireball or the human torch ability, I think that's fine, totally fine to do when crouching. So in our third-person character, under our gameplay ability functions, we have this ability can be activated or deactivated function that we set up. I think it was back in episode 34. It was the series of episodes where we were setting up our gameplay ability hotbar. And we already put in some pretty complicated logic about when a gameplay ability can and cannot be activated. And unfortunately, we have to expand that logic even further. But I think we're getting to the tail end of that logic, hopefully. And so the way we're going to address this is we're going to get these two nodes here. Actually, I'm just going to drag out a pin from the get here. We'll get how gameplay ability is used, and we'll get whether or not that's equal to, not this one, equal enum channel. So instead of display only, channel. And then also on our third person character, we can just right click and we can get whether or not our character is crouched. So if both of these things are true, if we're trying to use a channeled ability and our character is crouched, then actually we need that not to be true. So I can do a not Boolean, not this one. Come up here to the top, not Boolean here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a pin over here, and this one I'm going to connect down to the not. And I'm just going to move these out, make some more space. And we'll comment these right here. So we'll say channeled abilities cannot be activated while crouching. So we'll compile and save this, and let's test again with channeled abilities. All right, I'm crouching and flame. There we go, we got our flame, crouching fireball, crouching flamethrower. 3, can activate, good. Now let's say I take my finger off of C, but I'm still crouched, and 3, can't do it. Any of our channel abilities can activate while crouching. So far, so good. So now for the next section of this episode, we're going to set up our AI to be able to crouch. And the first thing we need to do is tell our AI when it's appropriate to crouch. So I'll drag our AI into the world. So AI, our BP adversary AI character that we started in episode, I think it was 45 with the metahuman actually, but really got going in episode 48. If we test this out, even though our AI sees us, it can't get to us. It cannot navigate under the beam. So let's fix that. So in our adversary AI character, we're going to create a brand new function. So plus here, and this is going to be simply crouch check. And what we're going to do is we're going to steal the build that we did 2 episodes ago, which was for our jump and movement check function. So I'm going to navigate into our jump check function here, and we can literally just copy this line trace by channel here. So I'm going to copy all this, go into our crouch check, paste it in. And if you didn't follow along that episode, that's totally fine. I'm going to show you what we're doing. So we got to connect up our crouch check here. And what this is doing is it's getting our capsule component location 30 units, 30 centimeters basically below the waist. And that's for our jump check because at that height, it's still a little bit too high to step over. But now we're going to change this to be at Z equals 85. And Z equals 85, that's just about at our character's head level. So it's checking to see, okay, is there something at that level? And we're also going to change it down here to 85. And I'm going to keep all this because this is determining how far out in space that check needs to go. And it's going to be based on how fast our character is moving. So I'm going to keep the equation just as is here. Then I'll come over here, and then if it's false, that means it didn't hit anything at our head level, no need to crouch. But if it's true, we're actually going to do another line trace. So what I'll do is I'll just copy all of this again, just unselect the crouch check, copy all that, paste it down here. And if true, connect this up. And this one, instead of 85 centimeters above the waist, it's going to be about 30 centimeters above the waist. And at that height, we can crouch. So I'll update both of these. And if this doesn't get a hit, so if we don't get a hit for this, then crouching will bring us under the target, whatever we hit. So from the false pin here, I can actually call directly our comprehensive crouch function. And the reason I can call this is because we built it on our third-person character, and the third-person character is our parent class of adversary AI character. And then immediately after I call this function, then we are going to set timer by function name, because every 0.3 seconds that our AI character is in the crouch position, it's going to attempt to uncrouch. So attempt to uncrouch is the name of the function that we just set up. So again, both of these functions are coming from what we just set up on our third-person character, attempt to uncrouch and comprehensive crouch. And so if your AI character is not a child class of your third-person character, this is not going to work. You're going to have to set up separate functions or a blueprint function library where you could call that function from either type of character. All right, so let me zoom out here because I just want to comment this a little bit. I'm going to move out our purple right there. All of this is going to be our step 1. And the comment for this is going to be step 1 checks to see if it has something in front of the character at head level. And actually, I'm going to move this up and out even further so that it's separated from all this stuff. Step 2, and this one's going to be, if so, then checks to see if it has something in front of the character at chest level, because this is about 30 units above the waist. And again, if you have a crouch animation where the character's crouching quite a bit, then you could actually set this even lower. So it's got to be at whatever threshold the player can actually crouch under. Well, the AI in this case. And then come down here, and this is going to be our step 3. Crouches and every 0.3 seconds attempts to uncrouch. All right, so if you got all that, that's looking good. Compile and save. But we still need to call this function, right? So I have to go back to our jump and movement check function that we set up 2 episodes ago. And actually, I'm going to set this to be the very first thing that it checks. So we're going to add a pin, and I'm just going to reconnect everything. So move these all down one. Just make sure you don't cross the streams. That's a Ghostbuster joke. And then this is going to call our crouch check, just like that. Compile and save, and moment of truth. Let's test our AI. All right, so our AI is about to see us. Yep, and there it goes, crouching, and uncrouches the second we emerge out the other side. Can our AI follow us? Yep, it looks like it's following us just fine, and out the other side. So the final part of this is how do we set up our footstep sounds when crouching to exist but be a lot quieter than normal. And for this, we're going to build off of what we set up last episode with noise events that can then be detected by our AI perception. But we're also going to build off of what we did all the way back in episode 19, which was our original footstep episode. So back in episode 19, and feel free to check that out, all that's still completely relevant. We set up under content, blueprint function libraries, pawn, human character, blueprint function library. The whole idea of blueprint function libraries, if you're not familiar with them, is that they are libraries of functions that can be used by virtually any actor, at least any actor that can reference them. So if we go into that, So back in episode 19, we set up our footstep sound and jump land sound, but then we did some more with water sounds and water splash effects. And you really don't have to worry about the rest of these this episode, because for crouching, the only one we're going to have to set up is our footstep sounds. So let's go into that function. And this is already a pretty big function. And to be honest, this was a very messy way of doing this we did back in episode 19, because I had it such that our landscape material used one material, wet dirt, if it was below a certain Z level, and then otherwise it could be painted above that Z level. And so the way I accommodated that in footstep sounds is I set a threshold where I basically said, okay, if that footstep location is less than -65Z, then we're going to assume that we're using our wet footstep sounds up here. And it still does things like footsteps on stone, footsteps on wood, but you get the idea, because grass would be different than stepping on like gravel, etc. So anyway, this is already very complicated, and I thought about just duplicating the whole thing and having crouching set of footstep sounds, but that seems far too arduous. There's a cleaner, more elegant way of doing this, and if you have your own footstep sound set up, that's totally fine. This way should work just fine. And the way this is going to start is we're going to create a new local variable, and that's going to be called our crouch loudness multiplier. And as a multiplier, of course, it's going to be a float. Now, last episode with AI perception, we set up our local footstep instigator. So we know the actor that's actually generating the footstep sound. And from that, we need to determine, okay, is that actor crouching? And it's not all actors that can crouch, right? It's specifically characters. And so what we need to do is from here, we need to cast a character, because if we're successfully able to cast a character, then we know that this is something that could potentially crouch. And as always, I'm going to make some space. So much space. Move these over. All right, so if the cast succeeds, if we're able to cast from our local footstep instigator, which is an actor, over to character, we know it's a character. And then if it's a character, we know we can get the character movement component, because the character movement component is what determines whether or not our character is crouching. And then we can get is crouching. And if crouching is true, so we got to branch off of that, branch off right here. Then we are going to set the crouch loudness multiplier, but actually we're going to set that in either case, whether it's true or false. Now, if crouching is false, this is just going to be 1, because it's going to be a normal full volume sound for footsteps. But if crouching is true, then it's going to be, let's do 40%. So 40% of volume, 0.4. So I'll connect this up here. I'll connect this up here. I'm going to move these down a little bit so I can straighten this out. And then also if the cast fails, so if something is generating footsteps but it's not a character, it's not going to be crouching. Go straight to this. I think that's going to be a rare situation, but we might have some weird monsters that are generating footsteps. I don't want to spoil too much. So we'll drag this down. And by the way, you could change this to be something other than 40%, but just in my testing it, it sounded like a good multiplier, because you could still hear the sound of the footstep, especially if it was on a loud substance like dirt or gravel, but it was still lessened quite a bit. And on something like grass, it generates almost nothing. So then I'll come over to the right here. We'll connect up both of these to the branch. And let's just do one last thing, which is comment this. So we'll comment just those. I'll move out our footstep location because that is not related to this. So this comment is going to be changes volume and noise event if character is crouching. So now that we've set up this multiplier here, now we actually have to make this multiplier drive how loud our sounds are, and then also how loud our noise events should be, this over here. Now the good news is we don't have to hook up the volume multiplier to every single one of these play sound at location nodes, because we only have to do it for our walking sounds. And the reason we only have to do it for our walking sounds is over here, we determine whether or not we're walking or running based on footstep ground speed being less than 300. For crouching, I set it to 150. For me, it's never going to be above that, so we're good there. Now, if you're going to have some crazy abilities where a player can crouch at like a speed of 600 or something, then you need to set this up for all your sounds. So if footstep ground speed is greater than 300, that's going to be false for crouching. So we'll come down here and we'll set our multiplier for each of these. So we'll get our crouch loudness multiplier and we'll expand each one of these. And you see that it's got a volume multiplier here. We're just going to hook it up directly there. And we're able to do that because the multiplier by default is just 1. And so if we're not crouching, this is still going to be 1. It's going to work just fine. So I'll expand this one, connect it up as well, and just set this for each of these. All right, 3 down. And now we've got these 5 to go. So if footstep ground speed is greater than 300, false, come down here. Same thing. So just make sure you've got it hooked up to each and every play sound at location node here. And then last but not least, we got to build off of what we set up for AI perception last episode. So we got to come up to our report noise event here. And instead of our footstep loudness simply going to be the loudness, we can just multiply that by our crouch loudness multiplier. So connect this up here, pull in our crouch loudness multiplier, and connect it up there. So if that's looking good, let's compile and save. And the last thing we need to do is because we have a separate crouching animation, we also need to trigger anim notifies off of that new animation. Because as it currently stands, the only thing actually triggering this function are the anim notifies that we set up back in episode 19. And let's go into our animation blueprint because I just want to show everyone who's not following along how that gets done. So back in our event graph, so back in episode 19, we started our left foot plant event and our right foot plant event. And then we have 3 episodes that are doing things off of those footsteps. I'm not going to go over everything that it's doing, but in short, in our new animation for crouching, we need to trigger each of these. My animations are located under my content folder in characters, mannequins, animations under Manny, Mixamo. Yeah, we can go into our crouch walk forward. And I'll pause that. And as I always do with anim notifies, I just do it a little bit ahead of the footstep. So that's our left foot there. So it's going to be right about here, maybe. Yeah, that looks good. Add notify and skeleton notify. That's going to be our left foot plant. And then we've got our right foot a little bit further along, right about there it's about to hit. So right click, add notify, skeleton notify, right foot plant. And then that should be sufficient then to trigger what we've got right here in our animation blueprint. And then that's going to trigger our footstep sound function, and it's going to do all of its magic here. So let's save this. Let's get out of this, get out of our animation blueprint, and we are ready to test. And if you want to test this first without AI, that might be good, just to see if you generate any sound. Now I hear it, but it's very slight. Yeah, and if you try this on grass, it barely generates a sound at all. So for the last part of the episode, we just need to do a little bit of function cleanup. So I'm going to exit out of our human character BFL, and back in our third person character, we have about, 4 new functions. And for each of these, I'm going to categorize them under a category of crouching. Compile and save that, and then over to our adversary AI character. Just got to take our crouch check function, do the same exact thing that we've done in previous episodes. We're going to put that under AI movement, and compile and save this. So that concludes our episode for today. And next episode, we're actually going to take a temporary break from AI. We're going to come back to it, I promise. But here's what we're working on next episode. So I hope to see you there.